the problem with developing a reputation is that you feel that you have to live up to that reputation. And this one was challenging for a lot of reasons. I'm better at speaking off script, so I may get lost from time to time, so bear with me. I want to give you a little bit of the inspiration for this. I was in England a few years ago, and I was doing a tour of Blenheim Palace, and the banquet room in Blenheim Palace had this enormous table, and they had set it up in various fashions. You know, how you would set a table for a formal dinner, how you would set a table for a hunting, luncheon, how you would serve breakfast and so forth. And it was absolutely fascinating. I mean, seeing where Churchill was born was kind of cool, but I was stuck on the table. It's the home ec teacher in me. And so one of the things that the docent there said was that, it became, especially during the Victorian era, it became such a status symbol to show off how much silver you had that the silversmiths decided to market that. And that's why when you go way back to that era, you find a lot of generic patterns. The King's pattern is one that's very popular. And if somebody wanted it personalized, they would monogram it. They had people there on site that would put your initial in it. And they said that, they realized that if Brenda had a party and Beth was going to have a weekend party 3 weeks later, Beth would want to have another piece of silverware more than Brenda, just to kind of one up her. And so the silversmiths actually, according to the docent, not who I'm assuming, knew what he was talking about, said that they would create a piece of silverware or flatware and then invent a use for it. And they'd wait until Beth showed up and say, have you seen the latest? This is a strawberry fork, and you just have to have this. So it was, kind of an interesting form of marketing. And when I came back from that trip, there was a issue of Victoria magazine in the lounge that had a picture of a woman's flatware collection. And that really intrigued me because there were pieces I'd never heard of, and I thought I was fairly attuned to that. So that's when Joy and I kind of decided this would be a fun. Now, at the time, I thought, okay, antiquing opportunities, because you can find antique flatware, it's fairly reasonable. I didn't realize COVID was going to shut everything down. So unfortunately, as a result of this talk, I'm going to be getting prompts from eBay probably for the rest of my national life that, I have some kind of obscure, piece of flatware that you just have to have.
And you will.
I'm, all right.
Point it back at your laptop instead of the screen.
There we go. All right, we're going to start out with definitions. I grew up thinking, the stuff you ate off was silverware. Technically, it's considered flatware. Flatware are the eating utensils, cutlery, such as forks, knives, and spoons, and silverware could be anything silver, bowls, hollowware, you name it. Sterling silver is an alloy of silver that contains 92.5% silver and 7.25% other metals. And, there's a standard. In order to be called sterling, it has to meet that obligation. At, a century or so ago, some of the marks, and I'm not going to talk about the markings because I could do a whole hour on that, would indicate the percentage. Silver plate is a coating of pure silver on a base metal, such as usually copper or nickel. And stainless steel was something that was invented after World War II or during World War II. And stainless steel is a combination of alloys that doesn't tarnish and so forth like pure silver or silver plate does. Okay, there's a history, there's a timeline for cutlery that I thought was kind of interesting, and I'm kind of do this in order, but I'll skip around a little bit. In the 1st century, Romans developed 2 types of spoons. They were considered probably the first eating utensil. And one was for eggs, one was for shellfish. Probably initially made out of shells, and they would attach sticks to them and so forth. Eventually they were carved. None of these exist, so we really don't know, but that's just kind of the supposition. The first fork that became significant, and it was, believe it or not, the most controversial of all the utensils. And it was invented by the Greeks. Maria Agrippina dies of the plague in 1006, and the clergy were happy because she was a fork user and very unabashed of the fork user. She also used perfumes, bathed in the morning dew, and they thought that she was really kind of full of herself. So it was that excess that, made her a very unpopular, person. The first fork in Italy, on a somewhat happier note, was carried to Italy by a Greek princess in 1071. So the next area or the next country where the fork was introduced was to Italy. It moved to France in 1553 when Catherine de Medici popularized the forks. That was part of her dowry. And they became okay. Now, skipping ahead, 1611 was when the first fork appeared in British recorded history. And the church frowned on them. They ruled that they took glory from God, who gave us fingers to eat with, and they were seen as effeminate. Finally, in 1633, Charles I declared them decent to use, so they became acceptable. Now, I skipped over knives, but I'm going to tell you that part. Knives have been around for a long time. First knives might have been pieces of chipped obsidian or flint used to cut meat. They were made for hunting. But they served a dual purpose because they were also used to cut food. Very few early knives have survived because they had to be continually sharpened. And they basically just disintegrated. And at that point, people had their own tableware and they carried it with them. So the early inns and so forth didn't supply eating utensils. The woman would have her spoon, from what I've read. The man would have a spoon and a knife, and he would cut her food that needed to be cut for her. So I think maybe that could have been where that tradition started out. The shapes of knife blades changed during the time, and I thought this was kind of interesting. In 1600, Sheffield began producing knives for eating. They were still pointed at the tip. In 1637, Cardinal Richelieu of France made a rule that knives used at his dinner table had to be blunt. And the reason was one of his frequent guests would use his knife to clean his teeth after the meal. And that kind of disgusted him. So he said, no more sharp knives at my table. That's when the blunt knife came about. In 1669, Cardinal Richelieu finally had enough influence to get Louis the 14th of France to ban pointed knives. And they also found out that, we've all experienced family holidays, that arguments sometimes escalated out of control. And if you had people sitting there with their pointed knives, it was real easy to to get into a fight. The main reason that, and I always thought there was some kind of innate reason for different types of knives, different styles, because we've gone through the gun handles and so forth. It was just what was in style at the time. And again, it was just kind of marketing. Things would come back in style. And it was interesting. I Googled contemporary flatware, and it's amazing what they're selling now. I mean, it's a whole kind of new world. Knives went through a lot of changes. Part of it was the fact that the knife blades deteriorated, and so they'd have to be retrofitted. So again, it just kind of depended on what was in style. Finally, after stainless steel was invented, a lot of the silver was retrofitted with stainless steel knives because even though it was a sterling handle, the knife blade would last longer with stainless steel. It wasn't until the 1800s that forks caught on in the United States. And in 1924, the modern stainless steel was developed. Now, throughout all of this, with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, or beginning of industrialization, silverware became more affordable, and matching sets were manufactured. And that's when it became more important to have your own pattern or whatever. You could choose, manufacturers would do different patterns. In 1840s, the process of silver plating was perfected, and basic eating utensils were readily available. Designers created lavish patterns for spoons and forks, and knives at that point were still made by cutlers. During the Industrial Revolution, houses began to keep large sets of flatware on hand, and with the rise in factories, then they became more consistent and less expensive. Really, dining became an art in the Edwardian period, but the Victorians took it and ran with it. It became even, a bigger deal and, kind of more pretentious as such. And when silver mines, oops, I didn't mean to do that. We're going to stay there for a minute. When more silver mines were discovered, then the costs came down, and designers became important. Tiffany in the United States was the purveyor of household goods at that time, silverware, flatware, so forth. And he made quite a splash, even influencing Europe with some of his designs and some of his displays. This is a complete place setting. It was designed by an English silversmith by the name of James Robinson. It shows, thank you, Bill. It shows the complete set that was available in that pattern, and there's 25 pieces. Everything from the seafood fork down to the demitasse spoon. And you can see, and those are just the eating utensils, not the serving utensils as well. That's a whole different. This was kind of indicative of what was available. Now that is not a Victorian pattern by any means. That's a more modern pattern, but it's typical of a Victorian set. Okay, which leads us to the Gilded Age of silver. In the 1870s, silversmiths began marketing items as sterling. Items were marked 0.925% for pureness as silver. 12 to 18 course meals were popular, and there was a flatware for each course. Now, you would never use all of these at one meal. For example, you've got the oyster fork and the, snail fork and the seafood fork. You wouldn't serve all of those at one time, but they were available. And the 1878 Paris exhibition, Tiffany and Company received numerous awards for the silver designs and especially for their display of the McKay silver service. They own part of the Comstock mine. The service was made with their own silver deposits. There were 1,250 pieces in of flatware alone, and that required the work of 200 men working 2 years to complete it. And they were the first American exhibitor to be recognized. I found a couple of quotes I thought were kind of interesting that kind of speaks to the status of silver. In 1867 novel, The Last Chronicles of Barset, the main character is at a dinner party given by his business partner. "Why doesn't what's-his-name have real silver forks?" asked Mrs. Van Sciver. "What's their use?" her friend replies. "Everyone has these plated things now. What's the use of a lot of capital lying dead?" Mrs. Van Sciver remains firm. "Everybody doesn't. I don't. You know as well as I do that the appearance of a thing goes for a great deal. Capital isn't lying dead if people know you have it." And I thought, that kind of, speaks to the importance of having that extra fork. The books of etiquette assured socially aware members of the Victorian society that the table was set in an appropriate manner. Isabella Beeton, who wrote a book about household management in 1861, was quoted as saying, "Animals eat, only man dines." So that kind of, puts it in perspective. Now, well, I'm jumping ahead, so we're going to go on to forks. Now, one of the many challenges in doing this talk was that as I sourced utensils, a lot of the people that are selling these on eBay don't know what they have, And so, you see something and you say, "Oh, I wanted a baked potato fork." I don't know why. It just seemed like no home should be without a baked potato fork. Well, they were really hard to find. They're very expensive, and I had a limit as to how much I was willing to spend to do this talk for Ruthmere. No offense. But, as I sourced, baked potato forks, and I would look at the picture, I'm like, that, doesn't look anything like the book. And I guess my Bible for this is a book that's called Sterling Silver Elegance. And if you're into silver or, just want to kind of figure out, it's out of print, but it really is a good source for antique silverware. And they have a lot of different patterns and styles and so forth that goes into depth about what all of these pieces were used for. One of the biggest problems with forks is that there are different sizes of forks. And if you've ever tried to order anything from the Silverware Replacement Company, I ordered a dinner fork to match my mother's pattern a few years ago and ended up getting this huge fork. Well, there were different sizes of dinner forks. They started out quite long, and then women complained that they were hard to eat with, so they came up with a smaller fork that is correctly called a place fork. The bigger one is. So to give you an example on here, that is the dinner fork, and this one here is a place fork. And it doesn't show up all that well on that because you can't see it in perspective to each other. Dessert forks usually have sometimes have that little kind of I don't know, kind of niche in the top. But that can also be used for a salad fork. And they're more or less used interchangeably. The salad forks were introduced in the 1880s, and usually they have the indented tine. The next one here is one that I found when I was out antiquing with Mark that I discovered was a lettuce fork. Yeah, when lettuce became popular, it was new and exotic then. And lettuce forks come in different sizes. You'll see I've got a serving lettuce fork too. This is a fish fork. They became popular when Americans began traveling to Europe. They usually were sold in sets, and you had the fish fork and a fish knife. And I couldn't find a fish knife that was even close. This one I thought was real interesting. This is the ice cream fork. Now, what does that look like? A spork. We call it a spork. But the ice cream fork has been around. Thomas Jefferson introduced the ice cream fork to America because when he was ambassador to France, he discovered he liked ice cream. And, he brought it back to America. It became a fad, so every new culinary fad needed a utensil to go with it. Cocktail forks are, like this. Usually I think of them in terms of shrimp, cocktails, or some other type of seafood. This is a escargot fork. And you can come up and look at these when I'm done. But the escargot fork is unique because it's much thinner. The tines are much thinner, and that's so that you can get under the shell, and get the snail meat out. So, who knew? And this has a gold wash on it that they discovered was used for some things that were kind of acidic, and it would keep keep it from tarnishing a little bit longer. And last but not least, these became a huge fan when strawberries became popular. This is a strawberry fork. And apparently these were, became popular in the late 1880s. They became popular as a souvenir for a lot of tourist attractions and so forth. So there are a lot of these that you can find on eBay that are a souvenir of Brighton Beach or someplace like that. All right. Knives. Knives are hard to find, because again, they deteriorate a little bit more rapidly. Early knives had a pistol grip handle. In the late 18th century, the straight handle emerged. Dinner knives are the most popular size. The one next to it is a fish knife. A fruit knife is used for eating fruit desserts. And some of the fruit knives that I found were, they actually were designed so that they kind of had they folded into the handle. And again, that way you could carry them, with you, should you encounter a fruit that needed cutting. This is part of a children's set, and it's known as a junior knife. Again, women decided that was a little bit easier to handle than the traditional table knife, so they became popular for breakfast and tea. So, some homes would have a whole set of the smaller size silverware that they would serve for other things. And then you have the butter spreader that still is in use today. All right. Spoons. Iced teaspoons. I thought this was kind of interesting. The iced teaspoons are usually longer, And in a place setting, they're a regular item in place settings sold in the southern part of the United States. So they, because of the sweet tea, they replaced the soup spoon because apparently they don't eat as much soup, where they don't have cold winters. Teaspoons are the most popular. That's the next one. Soup spoons come in 3 types. If you want to be really technical, bouillon spoon, the cream soup, and the formal soup, which is also used for a dessert spoon at sometimes. Ice cream spoons were developed in the late, when ice cream became popular, and that's an ice cream spoon. Citrus spoons were developed to serve citrus fruits during the 1890s. At that time, there was a tremendous citrus crop, and manufacturers teamed up with the citrus industry to promote their products. Egg spoons. Egg spoons have a kind of a unique bowl and kind of elongated handle so that you could eat the egg out of egg cups and so forth. Demitasse literally means half cup, and the demitasse was coffee that was served after dinner in smaller cups with the tiny spoons to match. And at that point, they thought coffee helped digest a heavy meal. And then the last but not least are the salt spoons. Unique pieces. Okay. When I read about the first item, I just had to have one. This is an asparagus tong. And I thought that they were used to serve asparagus. No. Asparagus is properly eaten with your fingers. And so these were designed so that you could pick it up. They were individual at individual places. And you, instead of having to use your fingers, you use this item. Except it was kind of impractical. They never really caught on because if the asparagus was overcooked, you ended up slopping it down. And, but, I was willing to spare no expense to have just because I thought it was so cool. Grape scissors, which is the next item. The grape scissors, that was a wedding present during the Victorian time. Grapes were just becoming popular, and you actually use this, to cut off the grapes, and then you would put that, on your plate, and then you would use your fingers to eat the actual grapes. But this is kind of more of a serving thing. Sugar tongs is the little item. That's pretty self-explanatory. The tea strainer is the way it was used to strain tea into a little cup. And if you are in England and you go to tea, more than likely the loose tea will be put in the pot. You will have one of these at your table. You strain this into the cup, and then you have this little holder to keep the moisture from getting on the table or whatever. The tea caddy spoon was to serve loose tea, put it in the pots. And then, we've all seen the junior or the infant. I told you I'm really bad at, okay. You have, a lot of us have these in our family, the baby or infant toddler. The item that I had never seen before that I thought would have been really useful when my son was learning to feed himself is the food pusher. And that was used when you were teaching kids to feed themselves with the spoon, to push the food onto the spoon. So I don't know why those passed out of fashion, but so anyway. Serving pieces. Serving pieces are even harder to find than regular tableware because a lot of those were melted down when silver prices got real high. And, they would, take those and melt them down because they could get, more than you could for a teaspoon. Fruit spoon usually has a fruit pattern on it of some type. The next one was something that kind of, that's a bonbon spoon, used for serving candy and so forth. The next one was one that was another one that I just had to have because I just thought it was kind of a cool thing. It's a confectioner's spoon, and it's used for putting confectioner's sugar on your sticky toffee pudding or, whatever, gingerbread, whatever the dessert of choice was. The next one is chocolate muddler. And, I get attracted to really useless things but back in the day, hot chocolate was really an important, item. The chocolate wasn't refined like it is now, so it would clot up. And so it needed constant stirring. And so you ended up with a spoon that was like this that had kind of a bigger bowl on it. And it was used to muddle the chocolate. Well, these came in two sizes. There was a small one for the regular cup, or there was one that was a big one for a chocolate pot. And I was at a silent auction last year for a charity, and there was a chocolate pot there that I thought was just so cool. And I didn't get it. So, and I'm thinking, this is so stupid. But I just had to have one. So, I had to have a muddler too. I mean, it's all part of the package. Sorry. That more serving pieces. Okay, the bacon fork. Sometimes that's called a sardine fork. I actually thought I was buying a sardine fork and found out that I got a bacon fork instead. That was used for serving bacon. The butter pick was used for pats of butter. So that, and I thought, that was, kind of a cool item. That would be a serving piece. The next one is a lemon fork. Lemon fork usually has connecting tines at the top. The lettuce fork, this is the big lettuce fork that was used for serving salads. And usually there's a spoon that matches it. Mine was affordable because it didn't have a matching spoon. The olive fork, and then a relish fork. Okay, and more. We're familiar with the cake server. The next was part of a three-part set, which was a cheese serving set that I found on eBay. This is the cheese knife. I never realized that there was a separate serving thing for soft cheeses. So the scooper thing, is for that. And then this little spatula is for serving pieces of hard cheese. And then this is the fish set. This is a serving fish set. The fork would be used to put the food, or to pick up, the fork, and then it would be put on that little flat knife and slid over to the plate if it was being served or if you were going in a buffet. And then, last but not least, a child's introduction to silver usually begins with an infant feeding spoon. And I don't have these here because I ran out of room on the table. But this was my set that was given to me at birth. Of course, I don't remember that, and I have no idea who gave it. But it consisted of everything you would need to launch me into semi-adulthood, from the infant spoon, and then the toddler set, and this was the children's size utensils. And it was made by Rogers Brothers, and the pattern was called First Love. Which, isn't that sweet? It kind of, it was kind of interesting because I'm thinking I was born in 1950, so that would have come about right after the war. And again, when you talk about marketing, people were hungry for that. My parents got married during the war, and that was one of the things that really always bothered my mother, is that they weren't able to get a set of sterling because, they weren't available. And, so I could see where those were probably lapped up. I want to talk a little bit about these because these are related. This is a spooner. It was given to me as a gift. I thought it was a vase at first. I found out that it's a Victorian spooner, and there was a lot of speculation in my little group about what they actually did with those. Found out that it was used for serving, because you would run short of silverware, believe it or not, if you were having a big event, and especially for breakfast. Not everybody would want tea or coffee or whatever. So they would use the spooner to put spoons in so they could go a little bit further. This is, believe it or not, a little mustard pot. And this is a mustard ladle. It's actually called a mustard spoon, but it's ladle shaped. And then I have the salt spoons that was used for the little salt dishes. I thought it was I went to an art fair a couple weeks ago, and there was a woman that she had collected bunches of these, and she had made little lids for them out of buttons, and they were selling like hotcakes, just to put trinkets, kind of like another take on a trinket jar. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the other little thing there is a jelly jar, and there's a jelly spoon to accompany that as well. Challenges with this: multiple uses. It was okay to substitute a lettuce fork for a salad fork if you were running out of lettuce forks, or you were running out of salad forks. Some people would give men the lettuce fork and women the salad fork. Lack of availability. And then the latest trend, and I had to bring this, that's kind of supply, is that you're starting to see a lot of these at craft shows and so forth. This is a bracelet made of spoons or spoon handles. And so, there's, creative way to use these items that, from what I've seen, the younger people aren't terribly interested in, like we were. Dinnerware has continued to evolve depending on the necessity, fashion, and dietary trends. Today's flatware buyer is looking for more casual designs, and they can choose from a full palette of colors, finishes, and materials. Gold, black, copper, and colored finishes are available. And they are very, very popular. The latest alternative, or the latest kind of trend, or one of the latest, are edible utensils as an alternative to plastic, because they're ecologically sound. They're not terribly tasty, but you know, they're not going to end up in a landfill, or if they do, they're going to decompose a lot faster than plastic. They're obviously not going to have a lot of staying power either. And surprisingly, that's a trend that was first, or the edible utensils were first invented back in 1562, if you can imagine. And they weren't used for tableware, they were used for bowls and so forth. So, you know, it's something that has come around and is timely again. So, that's it. I'm sorry, I'm usually a little bit more organized, but this has been a crazy week, so.